Good evening and welcome to our, third session of studying Heart Treasure of the Enlightened Ones. So first, kindly generate the intention to apply this on the path to enlightenment with the ultimate objective to benefiting all sentient beings and establishing them on the level of perfect enlightenment. So that's our motivation for this study. And then also very often with the study also, we're encouraged to apply something that we refer to as the methods for how do we actually listen. We talk about abandoning the 3 defects of the pot. The, what is it again? The 6 stains, the 5 wrong ways of retaining the teachings. And I think we actually looked at that in the first session. Anyway, please keep these in mind. And presently we are still in the first section, which is then what we refer to as the shortcomings of the decadent age. So first we'll look at the supplication, or first we'll invoke then the teachers of this text. So to Paltrimje, outwardly you are the Bodhisattva Shantideva, inwardly you are Shawaripa, Lord of Siddhas, secretly you are truly noble Avalokiteshvara, dispeller of pain. I supplicate you, Jigme Chiki Wompo, embodiment of the twofold wisdom of all the Buddhas. You are Manjushri, play of wisdom's tenderness, great chariot of the Buddha's teaching, king of knowledge. I supplicate you, Pema Dongak Lingpa. So in this way we invoke the presence and the blessings of Paltrimje and Dingunchen Rinpoche. So like I said, we're still in part 1. We've covered most of it, but we are then at verse number 18, where the text reads, okay, the text reads, disgust, because there's no one to be trusted. Sadness, because there's no meaning in anything. Determination, because there'll never be time to get everything you want. If you always keep these 3 things in mind, some good will come of it. So here we're not operating within a depressed vision that nothing's worth anything, but it's more to not be deceived, not be naive. And so what we're doing here is just recognize that the reality of that we sometimes subscribe to naively needs to be reevaluated. For example, what we think of in terms of our friends and who is our enemies. At the time when we have people we regard as friends and those we regard as enemies, we think of them as being solidly in one way or another. But the truth of the matter is it's very circumstantial. And so we might very well have friends that become enemies and vice versa. Moreover, also, whatever we do, as long as we're basically just striving for something that's for our own sake, doesn't really lead to much satisfaction. We can engage in a lot of effort, but very often these efforts that we undertake, they're a bit like drawing in water. They don't really have much ultimate value. And so in regards to this, we begin to recognize that things that appear as so incredibly important, they ultimately are futile, pointless. So that's where we begin to see our life in a slightly different perspective, and that's where we would say better to do something that has ultimate value. And so this is where we then encourage then the practice of Dharma. What we also recognize is that we don't have forever. Everyone is going to die, and even the Buddha is someone who passed on. So it's not as if then we could just sort of ponder and philosophize. It's about right now we have the sanity, we have the conditions, we have the leisure and so forth. So that's where we'd want to again and again contemplate the impermanence of our situation. Now, if we look, concerns for ourselves has never really given us much happiness. As long as we're engaged in just short-minded projects or short-term projects that are entirely about our own hedonistic pleasure, then very often it comes out with a very small result, and it's a very short-lived happiness. Whereas the moment that we're engaged in happiness for others, there's a much greater satisfaction. So this is where we'd want to focus on, rather than our own happiness, focus on altruism. You have actually Matthew Ricard, who a couple of years ago published a book, and it's translated into to English, which on the topic of altruism. And I think in France it actually has become quite a best-selling work. And this is a very real, very provocative perspective that is also something that very much could engage the modern conversation. This is something that we could share insights together with others around us. The point is then that if we're conceited, self-obsessed, absorbed, and so forth, if we're fussy, then we're never really going to become practitioners. And as long as we're caught up in all these actions that don't really mean much, then we are endlessly going to be going back and forth between suffering and happiness. And that's where, if we have a wider perspective, of course, what happens to us, that's sort of inevitable. What has brought circumstances to our present situation, that has to do with actions in the past. But what we do from now on, that's what shapes the future. So there's a lot of empowerment in us realizing that what we do from now on has impact on terms of our suffering and happiness. And also when we experience these various conditions, for example, suffering, this is something that we'd want to engage with in a constructive way. See the way in which suffering very often sobers us up, enables us to get clarity. And also from that point of view, we wouldn't necessarily view suffering as something that undesirable. As the third Drudupchen, he makes a big point about, the more that we begin to get upset every time something disagreeable happens, the more that becomes a pattern that becomes more and more deep, until we actually not much suffering happens before we're profoundly thrown into frustration and unhappiness. So we want to integrate suffering and also happiness, of course. There's nothing wrong with having happiness as long as we're not attached to it. So the degree to which we could integrate that, then we begin to nurture then our path on towards temporary happiness and also ultimate enlightenment. Khyentse Rinpoche says, contemplating all this, and this is then viewing on the conditions of our ordinary existence, and the way that we pursue these ordinary agendas, he says, sadness, revulsion, and determination will rise simultaneously. Sadness at seeing the conditions of beings and your inability to help them. Revulsion at the thought of continuing to go round and round in this vicious circle, and determination to do something about it by practicing the Dharma. So then there's the question, is it a good idea to not trust anybody? I've heard you speak about we start to trust others more through practice. Well, that's true, but we're talking about two different things. One is the conventional, rather naive assumption and the conventional ideas that sell us beliefs in very short-lived happiness, and that's what we don't want to trust. And the other is when we begin to practice, yes, there's a greater confidence, and with confidence in oneself, there's also naturally also a confidence in others. We begin to see the goodness as it's, you could say, abides innately in others. But of course, what we're talking about here is more about not being naive. So Paul Rinpoche says, there's no time to be happy. Happiness is over just like that. You don't want to suffer, so eradicate suffering with Dharma. Whatever happiness or suffering comes, recognize it is the power of your past actions, and from now on, have no hopes or doubts regarding anyone at all. So again, the same thing applies here, that we are cultivating an attitude about not being naive about what happens, and also being realistic about what is happening with us, but at the same time also having this empowered perspective that something can be done. So as much as we strive for happiness, then very often we don't really get a whole lot of it. Of course, we might have presently some happy circumstances, but very often these don't last. And also we can look around us. There are not many people who have actually lasting conditions of happiness. The point here really is that with us practicing the Dharma, there's the possibility to actually be constructive about this. So that's where we recognize that we can enjoy happiness while it's there, without any attachment. And undesired suffering, this is something where, while we can't change the circumstances, we can change our attitudes with regards to what happens. So whatever happens to us is not something that just happens randomly. This is due to past actions. This is due to whatever we did in the past. But at the same time, in terms of the future, then we could be proactive, and that's where again it applies that we should integrate the circumstances, regardless of whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. Particularly with regards to suffering, we say it can be a valuable incentive for practice. We very often become much more clear-headed when we're through challenging circumstances, and we look at the examples of the likes of Milarepa and so forth, where these circumstances bring persons really to profoundly integrate the vision and practice of the Dharma. Rinpoche says actually in the text, the more you suffer, the more you can practice taking on the suffering of all beings. The more we've actually undergone suffering, then also we begin to sympathize with others. We actually, strangely enough, the more we go through of suffering, and we see people who've been through suffering, very often if they don't go into a sort of a pattern of bitterness and feeling victimized and so forth, if there's a condition of courage, then very often the suffering they've been through has enabled them to actually have greater empathy. Expecting a lot from people, you do a lot of smiling. Needing many things for yourself, you have many needs to be met. Making plans to do first this, then that, your mind's full of hopes and fears. From now on, come what may, don't be like that. So we probably all know how artificial we can become when we're driven by all sorts of hopes and fears and expectations and worries. We can maybe notice it in ourselves, and we can also notice it in others. And we can also see how much anxiety there is around ourselves, or when there's power and affluence, then very often people end up acting very artificially. So that's where we could see that these short-term goals that very often are part of, and this is again where it comes back to don't trust, that very often is seen as being desirable. They in fact don't really give us much satisfaction at all, and very often around the pursuit of these goals there's a lot of artificiality and a lot of constant worry, particularly then in places where there is a lot of power, affluence, and so forth. Then there's also a lot of manipulation and a lot of dishonesty. So if we were to actually have success, then we can see even we had everything we wanted, we very often wouldn't have enough. It's a bit like drinking salt water. So we have this famous quote, which we have from Nagarjuna, where he says, of all riches, the greatest is contentment. Incidentally, also Alfred Nobel said something to that effect. But the point then of Dharma is to be content, to live simply. Rinpoche says, if we could taste the ambrosia of the gods, we would long for something even more delicious. If we could wear their exquisite apparel, we would crave something still finer. So don't exhaust yourself uselessly like a child running to find the end of the rainbow. Ordinary goals are completely futile. Develop the conviction that the only worthy aim in life is to practice the Dharma in order to help all beings. So if we look at the lives of great sages, then we see that their sort of attitude with regards to the world is a bit like someone who is looking at children that are childlessly, that are naively all caught up in their games and take them very seriously. A sage doesn't really mind, but at the same time is not really fascinated. And at the same time, the sage's concern and ambition is really just to enable those in the world to be free of suffering, and to ultimately be liberated. So sounds like networking. I guess so. I guess you could say there's an element of networking. Oh yeah. In terms of the sort of yes, the anxiety that goes with networking within the echelons of power and affluence. Indeed, yes. So Paljamrita says, 21. Even if you die today, why be sad? It's the way of samsara. Even if you live to be 100, why be glad? Youth will have long since gone. Whether you live or die right now, what does this life matter? Just practice Dharma for the next life. That's the point. Okay, now this also is important study, because this is also something that you're not going to hear that often, particularly in the modern day and age, where there's the belief in the materialist view of the mind as just being something that exists as long as your brain and your body is functioning. Hence, there's not really any notion of anything beyond just these, 80, maybe 100 years if we're lucky. I think Australia's oldest person is 110. So in that case, then sure. But the thing is, consciousness is not like that. And so in that we will be re-embodied again and again and again. What only will really help us is the Dharma. So if we have practiced the Dharma in this life, then passing along, we don't really have any regret. Now, if we haven't practiced the Dharma, like Khenzo just says, you might not have practiced the Dharma, and you haven't worried about that. Well, he says one thing you can be worried about is that you don't have to worry about not being reborn in samsara. That will happen. So from that point of view, then you'll get you'll naturally have plenty of lifetimes. Of course, the problem is that having plenty of lifetimes from a Buddhist point of view is not really that desirable, because we can't really be sure to have that many happy existences. So that's where we're talking a little bit about taking responsibility for our future lives. Now, if we were to have a long life, like it says here, then yeah, that might be nice. But again, very often with old age is that there's a lot of suffering that comes with it, and that could drag on for a long time. One of my friends has very long-lived relatives, and sort of is worried about if superannuation is going to last that long if she hangs in there. But the point is, of course, just being alive in itself has no ultimate value. Now, if we haven't practiced the Dharma, it's not as if then we need to regret anything. We could start the practice of the Dharma at any time. The thing is, if we don't practice the Dharma, then this life is pretty much wasted. So if we start practice now, then every day will be valuable. And if we have experience and realization, we can meet death as meeting an old friend. The moment that we die, then we are back to what we have been familiarizing ourselves with during the entire existence, which is this original condition of our consciousness. And having familiarized ourselves with this, then we're not at any point actually going to be separating from what's familiar. Anyway, Rinpoche, he quotes Gampopa and he says, as the peerless Gampopa said, at death, the best practitioner, having exhausted all samsaric tendencies, will merge with the great luminosity. The middling practitioner will have no fear, being confident that he will go straight to a Buddha field. The inferior practitioner, having practiced some Dharma, will at least have no regret, knowing that he or she is safe from rebirth in the lower realms. So that's where we have done our best. We might not sort of reach the nth degree of enlightenment, but then again, we might be able to die without regret. That's very valuable. So the thing is, as far as the things of this life goes, it's not something we can hold on to. And this way, if we look around, we can see everything that we are saying here in terms of the teaching is something that we can verify for ourselves. So we can look around us and see whether we can hold on to things of this life. We can't. There's either in this life or certainly at the time of death. So were we to live longer, the point made earlier, we would just draw out the miseries of old age. As long as we have hope and fear, nothing will make us happy. So as long as we're living with this anxiety about what might happen, hoping that we might just, have a few more years, or we might have this favorable circumstance and so forth, fearing we might not have those years, fearing certain circumstances, it doesn't really matter as long as we don't have this unconditional confidence, then nothing will make us happy. So it's only really once we begin to engender this greatness of mind that is unconditional, and particularly we're talking about here bodhicitta, which is what we're going to be looking at in terms of the greatness of mind that is relatively concerned with the well-being of others, and ultimately beyond any reference point whatsoever. So it's only with this bodhicitta that we obtain the real objectives of lasting happiness. So presently, we have everything there. We have a precious human rebirth. We have met the teacher. We have met the teaching. We have the opportunity to practice. Question is, are we really going to use this opportunity, or will we squander it? So there's a story of Chetsun Milarepa, who said to, sometimes actually when you see Milarepa, try and notice there's a deer in front, there's a dog, and then there's a gentleman with a bow. And this is taken from the story of somebody called Chiro Gompo Dorje, who was a hunter that met Milarepa. And Milarepa had a completely different lifestyle from this hunter. And in sort of inquiring about each other's lifestyle, they got to know each other. And Chiro Gompo Dorje became Milarepa's student and became a very good practitioner. But in their discussion, when Milarepa was sort of commenting on Chiro Gompo Dorje's choice to be a hunter, he said, to have the freedoms and fortunes of a human birth is usually said to be precious. But when I see someone like you, it doesn't seem precious at all. So Chiro, meaning the guy from this place called Chira, he took that to heart and became a student of Milarepa. So we're now completing this session, this section of the book that is called Shortcomings of Our Decadent Age. So this, Khyentse Rinpoche says about that, this first section is set out in terms of the Four Noble Truths, the teachings given by Lord Buddha in his first turning of the wheel of Dharma. It corresponds to the first of the three paths, the Hinayana. Pointing out the faults of samsara in general, it urges us in particular to revolt against the negativity of this dark age. This determination to be free from samsara is the foundation of all Dharma practice. The second section now goes on to explain the antidote to samsara, the view, meditation, and action of the Mahayana. So we shall look at that. And again, reiterating this somewhat, Khyentse Rinpoche says, the first section outlining the preliminary path, the Hinayana, was intended to engender in us a feeling of weariness and revulsion towards the conditions in which we find ourselves in samsara generally, and more particular in this decadent age. The second section now goes on to define the remedy for this situation, the view, meditation, and action according to the great vehicle of the Buddha's teaching, the Mahayana. These teachings are explained in two sections. First, the intermediate path, the Sutrayana, and second, the extraordinary path of skillful means, the Mantrayana. So today we're going to look at the first section, the Sutrayana. And here we are then going to be looking at what constitutes really that which we call the Nundro. So when we're approaching the Mantrayana teachings, to have the proper foundation, we practice what is known as the Nundro, which means then the preliminaries or the foundational practices. But in the context of the Nundro practice, we actually practice then the path of we integrate all the very elements, the quintessential elements of the path of the sutras. So generally, we would say that the taking of refuge is the foundation of all the Buddha's vehicles. So by the way, also when we talk about the path of the sutras, it's not opposed to the path of the mantras. It is simply the foundation for the mantra. So there's never ever any place in any of the Buddhist teachings that the sutra teachings aren't practiced. But the first of these then is taking refuge. So samsara, we've already established, is uniquely a condition of suffering. And the point is that diagnosing this illness, it is a curable illness. It's not like we're stuck with some sort of impossible situation. Yeah, there's suffering, but we can do something about it. So this is not where we go into sort of the depression that many modern people have, saying the life is meaningless and it's all just, people are all selfish, genes are selfish and so on. Everybody's, driven by the lowest common denominator and so on and so forth. There's an assessment that yes, indeed, as long as we have this afflicted, self-centered agenda and this confusion that drives this, then there is uniquely a condition of suffering. But the point is, this is all operating within a delusional condition that we can do something about. So the delusion that sentient beings, they suffer from in samsara is not something that's incurable or something where they're destined to suffer. It's caused by a cognitive dysfunction. It comes about through delusion. So there's something we can be done. However, just stumbling in the dark is not going to help a lot. We need then the guidance of the enlightened ones. So that's where we look towards those that have cleared away confusion and who have uncovered a natural potential. So this is then what we refer to as the enlightened ones. And this is then, of course, what's implicit in the Buddha's teaching. Particularly here, we invoke Chenrezi, Avalokiteshvara, as the embodiment of all the Buddha's compassion. We could say this quality of compassion and the quality of Chenrezi is the very core of what we refer to as enlightenment. And of course, in this particular text, the heart treasure of the enlightenment, the focus of this text is the practice of Avalokiteshvara, the practice of Chenrezi. So in the text, it reads, so then approaching this notion of taking refuge, then it starts off saying, "O fount of compassion, my root teacher, Lord Chenrezi, you are my only protector. The six-syllable mantra, essence of your speech, is the sublime Dharma. From now on, I have no hope but you." So here we identify Chenrezi in numerous ways, and Khyentse Rinpoche discusses then all the various qualities of Chenrezi. And we can sum this up saying that we'd want to understand what is Chenrezi. Chenrezi is an enlightened Buddha, taking on the form of a bodhisattva. So we have many sutras where the bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara requests teachings, or in the case of the Heart Sutra, the one that actually articulates the teaching. But this was someone around the Buddha who had a key role in terms of participating in the formulation and the spreading of the Buddha's teaching. So in that sense, we can understand Chenrezi in both as an enlightened Buddha or as a bodhisattva. We can also understand Chenrezi as the very ground of all the enlightened ones. This is the very nature that is basic to every enlightened Buddha. We would say all the Buddhas are one in the expanse of wisdom. And we can also see Chenrezi as the embodiment of compassion. And of course, here, when we chant the 6-syllable mantra, we see Chenrezi as a deity, the 4-arm Chenrezi or the 1,000-arm Chenrezi, 2-arm Chenrezi. We have actually many, many forms of Chenrezi, but we view Chenrezi as then the embodiment of this universal quality of compassion. We would say Chenrezi's body is the Buddha, the form of the Buddha, what is it again? We would say Chenrezi's body is the Sangha. We would say Chenrezi's speech is the Dharma, and Chenrezi's mind is the Buddha. And we can understand Chenrezi as the embodiment of all the objects of refuge. We could also say Chenrezi is the 3 roots. We can also say Chenrezi are the 3 kayas, meaning Chenrezi is the guru, the deva, and the dakini, or in Tibetan, lama, yidam, and dakini. Chenrezi is the 3 kayas, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Niyamanakaya. So we would see Chenrezi as inseparable from all the Buddhas. And above all, we would see Chenrezi as inseparable from our root teacher. We can talk about Chenrezi as some principle, but when we're seeing our Chenrezi, seeing our teacher, then we shouldn't think that Chenrezi is something other. Chenrezi, in terms of the way that we understand the manifesting of the Vajrayana teaching in this world, we would say Chenrezi manifested as Guru Rinpoche. The display of Guru Rinpoche was the display of compassionately engaging in the world, teaching the teachings, benefiting sentient beings. And as such, we see Chenrezi as simply as the manifestation of enlightened activity. It is the very character and nature of enlightenment. And we would say to practice and to engage in the practice of Chenrezi is to realize all Buddhas. So in other words, there's nothing lacking in this simple practice, which of course we say it's simple from the point of view it's not that difficult, but of course there is tremendous value and benefit of it. This is also a point that's then made here where we say reciting Chenrezi's mantra is the wisdom of enlightenment in sound. The Mani mantra contains all mantra. It is the superior mantra. Reciting the Mani mantra is equivalent to reciting all the scriptures. The benefit of reciting it is praised. It is praised in many places. Reciting the Mani mantra, all the Mahayana qualities will blossom. Reciting the Mani mantra, Chenrezi will remain with us. In general, this principle of mantra, we would generally, in Tibetan, we would translate the term mantra as yikyo, which means protecting the mind. But here we refer to mind as the primordial quality, the primordial sanity that's innate. For example, when we practice Vajrayana, we are practicing a form of yoga. We are aligning ourselves with the innate, what we call the innate 3 Vajras, the innate body, the innate speech, and the innate mind. And that's where we're aligning ourselves with the innate body when we visualize deity, and also when we practice yoga and so forth, there's a sense that the body innately there's a subtle dimension of our being, the physical aspect of our being, which is what we call the subtle body. And those who practice yoga, for example, yantra yoga, in a way, what you're doing there is actually aligning yourselves with an innate disposition of purity. So when people practice yoga, they actually feel good just by the practicing the postures and so forth, even though they might have to sort of go beyond their comfort zone somewhat. Then the yoga itself, because it's aligning with the innate disposition of the body, there's a feeling of well-being, and there's a sanity, a clarity that takes place through the physical posture. Similarly, when we practice the yoga of speech, which is chanting the mantra, we're also aligning ourselves with an innate disposition of non-confusion, a natural disposition of energy that is innate to us. And as such, then, we invoke then the wisdom of enlightenment through the repetition of mantras, whichever mantras it might be. But all of them come from the Sanskrit alphabet, and the Sanskrit alphabet itself also is something that was not conceived just randomly, but is the knowledge of sound as it exists within the subtle body and also within the universe, which was the scope of the great rishis of the old India. And similarly, also this is taught within the tantras. So on the level of the Sambhogakaya, then all the various sounds of mantra are renowned as the natural resounding of reality. And this is also what great yogis in the old India they understood. So we would say the repetition of any mantra contains all the other mantras, but particularly then here we are emphasizing this, what we call the Mani mantra, which is what we call Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. And if you are more, as the Tibetans, they would say Om Mani Padme Hum. You know, that's very often what we would chant, but the Tibetans would always make a point about how that they corrupt their mantras and we should learn the Sanskrit. So in the modern dissemination of the of Mantrayana, then there's this funny thing that happens that Tibetans will say, please chant the mantra in Sanskrit. And so many people strive, you know, like you have the Nalanda Translation Committee and many others with people who are knowledgeable about Sanskrit, actually reconstructing the original Sanskrit, the Sanskrit sound. So we have that. Meanwhile, the Tibetans themselves, as much as they promote the chanting of the Sanskrit, they will continue to chant it the Tibetan way. So there's you could say, a prevalent practice of chanting it in Tibetan, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. Anyway, either is fine. And of course, the value of the chanting of mantra is something that goes very deeply into the dimension of this purity that abides within, which is, of course, the objective of all the practice of the path. Hence, it covers all scriptures, it has countless qualities and so forth. And also, we should understand that Chenrezi is not ultimately something external to us. And reciting the mantra, we invoke the unconditional ground of Chenrezi that abides within us. If we're reciting the Mani mantra, we could say Chenrezi is always with us. So Khyentse Rinpoche quotes the Karanda Vuya Sutra, where it says, if you recite 100 million manis, all the myriad living organisms in your body will be blessed by Chenrezi. And when you die, even the smoke from the cremation of your corpse will have the power to protect whoever inhales it from rebirth in the lower realms. So if we're continually chanting mantra, then this will affect all of our being. So actually, in recent time, we have one Japanese scientist, Emoto, who said that if you put sacred writing underwater, the crystals of the water actually become very beautiful. If you put something very negative, they become correspondingly negative. So we could say, just as from that point of view, since a large portion of our body, the majority of our body, is water, then we're naturally imbuing this with the qualities of Chenrezi. So both from the point of view of the classical sources and also temporary science, we can say there's basis for the almost physical value of the chanting of the mantra. 100 million manis is a lot, but I should remind you there are persons who actually achieve this. The late Deshong Rinpoche was known to have chanted the 100 million manis 3 times in his life. So there you very often see practitioners who would just continually just chant Mani mantra at all times. Reciting the Mani mantra has infinite virtue. Did I just say that? Oh yeah, no, it's there. Yeah. Reciting the Mani mantra has infinite virtue. Reciting the Mani mantra will keep death at bay. So we've established the value of chanting the mantra, and also, like Khyentse Rinpoche says, the chanting the mantra of the Mani actually is something. The warmth of chanting the warmth of chanting the Mani mantra is such that it would keep. What does it say? There is nothing in the whole world that can actually frighten away the Lord of death. But the warm radiance of Chenrezi's compassion can completely dispel the dread felt by anyone as death approaches. This is what is meant by undeceiving refuge. So we would view this as something that gives us ultimate protection. We would say Chenrezi has great compassion and great powers to free us. So through this quality of compassion, there is tremendous power. And while the innately Chenrezi is never separate from us, and innately our reality is actually the Potala, the pure realm of Chenrezi. Potala means, by the way, the realm of Chenrezi, or the pure realm of Chenrezi. Hence, also in Lhasa, you have this great palace of the Dalai Lama that is referred to as the Potala. But through chanting the mantra, then this enables us to connect with this dimension, this reality again, as per the yoga of speech. Now, this does require faith. Now, faith in a Buddhist context is not about believing something that somebody tells you, but faith is this dimension where ordinary positions for or against falls away, and there's an experience of greatness, an experience of awe that we might have in our own existence as something that lies beyond just the ordinary agendas of self and our ordinary narrowness sort of falls away. Then there's an appreciation of greatness. This might take place in encountering great landscapes or things of great beauty, a condition of awe. But it's also something that happens when we encounter truth. There's also something that happens when we encounter great persons that embody truth. And that's where we have this experience, this unconditional experience of faith. So when we have that greatness of mind that we could call the faith mind, then something can transpire. When we have this narrowness that doesn't have this dimension, then we're kind of cut off for really accessing this natural purity. So, and also we would say, while the Buddha's teaching is vast and has so many qualities, and there's so much of it, then even if we were to know all the various Buddhist scriptures, then ultimately just knowing them intellectually is not enough. We need that which goes beyond. And again, coming back to faith, we need something that is beyond just the intellectual, something that's genuine. And that's then when this is fully integrated, we call this realization. So that's where the practice of the Mani mantra goes so much further than just intellectually acquiring knowledge. So this is why we would say that the practice of the Mani mantra is something that has tremendous benefit. It won't help that we know the Buddha's teaching if we don't actually apply it. Just like leaving the medicine by the bedside, just having it there is not going to help us. Khyentse Rinpoche says, we have read a lot of books and heard a lot of teachings, but it hasn't been of much benefit in really transforming our being. Leaving the doctor's prescriptions by the bedside will not cure the illness. So turn yourself inward and ponder deeply the meaning of Dharma until it permeates your whole being. The text says, whatever I know, I've left it as theory. It's no use to me now. Whatever I've done, I spent on this life. It's no use to me now. Whatever I've thought was all just illusion. It's no use to me now. Now the time has come to do what's truly useful. Recite the 6-syllable mantra. So what the proposition here is everything is contained in chanting this mantra. Of course, what we can see both in terms of our actions, in terms of what we've done and thought, all these various projects of our life ultimately are going to leave us empty-handed. They have no real constructive impact on our existence, either presently or in the terms of the future. And what we know is that we've lived a life where we've had so many ideas, so many plans, and so forth, and yet how do they actually ultimately benefit? So here we want to be clear. Why not practice the essence of the teachings, reciting the Mani? If we're reciting the Mani mantra, it's not just about us thinking, what does this mantra mean? What is it? It's often translated, hail jewel in the lotus, which is, yeah, that's a translation. But of course, what we're talking about here lies beyond just the scope of the intellect. So the practice of reciting the Mani is practice of invoking and engaging with great faith this pure dimension, which of course is what we begin to experience through the practice of the path, whether it's on the level of us contemplating the teaching or actually engaging in the meditation such as shamatha and vipassana, engaging in bodhicitta and so forth. All of it is enabling us to connect with a pure dimension, which we then are connecting with through the recitation of this mantra, through this yoga of speech. So that is what really has great value. Rinpoche says, like waves, all the activities of this life have rolled endlessly on, one after the other, yet have left us empty-handed. Myriads of thoughts have run through our minds, each one giving birth to many more. But all they have done is to increase our confusion and dissatisfaction. Wouldn't it be better to meditate on the essence of the teachings and recite the Mani? The only never-failing, constant refuge is the 3 jewels. The 3 jewels' single essence is Chenrezig, with total, unshakable trust in his wisdom, convinced and decisive, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So this is Paltro Rinpoche's message here. It's all there in the chanting of the Mani mantra. By the way, if you ever, I've never been there myself, but in Tibet, and I just spoke with someone recently who went there, there's a wall which is several kilometers long with just rocks where the Mani mantra has been carved out. And this was all commissioned by Paltro Rinpoche. It said that he, over a long time, he had many, many carvers. You know, he might have received some offerings or somehow some offerings came his way, and Paltro Rinpoche had no interest in any kind of possessions whatsoever. He lived out in the wild, so he he rarely sort of slept in houses. I think he had a vow to not sleep in ordinary people's houses. If he slept indoors, it would have been in monasteries. But he just stayed in caves and hermitages and so forth. He owned nothing whatsoever. So whatever offerings came his way, he put it into various virtuous projects. And one was this carving of all these thousands and thousands and thousands of stones with the Mani mantra on it. And it said that when this was completed, he sent a letter to Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo asking Khyentse Wangpo to come and consecrate it. Khyentse Wangpo didn't go, but the day that the consecration took place, there was this rain of flowers that came from the skies, and also, oh yes, that's right, and also there was rice. Like Yuan Lamas, they consecrate something, they throw rice, and it said that that this rice that all of a sudden fell on the wall as it was being consecrated was actually Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo's doing. So Paltrang Rinpoche was a great advocate of the practice of chanting the Mani mantra. Of course, Paltrang Rinpoche was also famous as a great Dzogchen master, as a great holder of the Vinaya, great master of teaching the way of the Bodhisattva, and also a great teacher of the Prajnaparamita. But very much wherever he went, he promoted this practice of chanting the Mani mantra as the essence of all practice. So we would say our only true place of refuge is Chenrezi, as we saw before. All the various aspects of refuge, they are contained within the chanting of the Mani mantra. And we would say the Lama, Yidam, and Dakini, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the three Kayas, and so forth are all present in Chenrezi. We should also recognize that, as it says here in the text, we fall naively for so many other objects of refuge. We think that the things are going to be fine if we have this or that, and we are we're very silly in our sort of delight in things that very often actually has no real benefit for us. Chenrezi possesses all the qualities of elimination and realization. Chenrezi embodies and shows the value of all the removing. It enables us to remove all the what obstructs us, all the qualities that, or rather, enables us to genuinely benefit or genuinely eliminate what is destructive, and enables us to realize and cultivate what is beneficial, constructive. So we talk of the path in terms of elimination and realization, and through the example of Chenrezi, then and through the practice of Chenrezi, all these qualities are perfected. So we would say that Chenrezi is the embodiment of all refuges, and again, Chenrezi is inseparable from our own teacher. So we should supplicate and take refuge in our own teacher as inseparable from Chenrezi. So we shouldn't think, should I think of my teacher or should I think of Chenrezi? There's absolutely no difference between the two. When we're visualizing the deity Chenrezi, this is simply, you could say, the intangible quality of an enlightenment that's embodied in the form of Chenrezi, and that is what our teacher is. Or if we're thinking of our teachers, to think that there's some Chenrezi elsewhere. When we take refuge here, we take refuge in the Mahayana manner, not just for this life and to be free of suffering, but we do so in order to enable ourselves to become ultimately free so that we can benefit others. And so here we take refuge with four kinds of faith. The first is the inspiration that we feel when we encounter Chenrezi and encounter our teacher inseparable from Chenrezi. There's this kind of like just delight, thinking, wow, what a great being. And then there's a place then that also is not just externalizing, but also thinking, gosh, I would want to actually follow this person. And that's where we begin to have this longing faith. And then we begin to have some confidence that not just objectively out there's a remarkable person who we wish to follow, but there's also some sense of these qualities abiding within ourselves. There's something that happens when we have experience on the path. And then finally, when we have realization, this is what we call irreversible faith, that Chenrezig is seen to be completely inseparable from ourselves. And that's where we have an unconditional faith. So taking refuge is not something we should think of as just something we do as beginners, but it's something we never stop doing, and it's basic to all paths. And famously then, when Atisha came to Tibet, wherever he went, he would teach taking a refuge, and then he became known as the refuge Lama. But since refuge was seen as something that you do at the beginning of the path, then one day somebody says, "Hey, you become known as just the refuge Lama, as if, hey, you're getting a bad rep. You're not known as the great Tantrika Lama. You're only known as the refuge Lama." And Atisha said, "This is not at all disparaging. This is a great compliment, because I have nothing I would rather achieve than to enable everyone to have a proper foundation for the path." So that's that's when Atisha was told he was known as the refuge Lama. Now, in terms of the foundations that we're discussing here, the path of the sutra, then, and also what we have when we practice Nundro is what we call the generating bodhicitta, or the thought of enlightenment, Semkye. So in the text, Paul Rinpoche writes, the basis of the Mahayana is the thought of enlightenment. This sublime thought is the one path trodden by all the Buddhas. Never leaving this noble path of the thought of enlightenment, with compassion for all beings, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So the thought of enlightenment, bodhicitta in Sanskrit, is the wish to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings. We also read this in the Way of the Bodhisattva. This is Shantideva's definition. Now, when we talk about this bodhicitta, or the thought of enlightenment, it has two aspects. One is what we call the relative bodhicitta, the wish to establish all beings in enlightenment. And then we also have the absolute bodhicitta, which is realization itself, this falling away of all delusion and the expanse in which there's no reference point or any conceptual constructs. This is the ultimate nature of reality. But the latter is subtle, and so we always begin with the developing of the relative bodhicitta. And here we have two aspects. There's the aspiration and the application. Shantideva, he says, one is like the wish to go, and the other is the actual going itself. But as long as we are in samsara, as long as we are sentient beings that operate with the notion of there being a samsara, there is self and other and so forth, then we continually want to generate this thought of enlightenment. So when we do this, we take this vow of bodhicitta in front of Chenrezig as witness. If you're doing the Nundro, then you'll know that you take this vow of bodhicitta in front of the refuge tree, but there's no difference between these two. We have the refuge tree or Chenrezig as our witness. When we're taking refuge, we think of Chenrezig inseparable from our teacher in front, as someone that we supplicate to deliver us from the fears of samsara, with the intention that we can bring others to freedom as well. But here also we visualize Chenrezig as inseparable from our teacher, but we think of then Chenrezig as our witness, that they're bearing witness to our commitment. Now, when we actually go about meditating on this, we start off wishing to benefit all sentient beings. We recognize that all beings have been our parents, And we recognize that all of them wish happiness, and yet in their confusion, they create this, they cause this for their own suffering. And so we meditate on this this equanimity and caring for equally for all sentient beings, contemplating what they're going through. We can start by sometimes thinking of our parents and thinking of them, what they would be like if when they're going through various lower realm experiences. And then we extend this contemplation to all sentient beings. So about this, Rinpoche, he says, all sentient beings are the same in wishing to be happy and not to suffer. The great difference between oneself and others is in numbers. There's only one of me, but countless others. So my happiness and my suffering are completely insignificant compared to the happiness and suffering of infinite other beings. What truly matters is whether other beings are happy or suffering. This is the basis of bodhicitta. We should wish others to be happy rather than ourselves, and we should especially wish happiness for those whom we perceive as enemies and those who treat us badly. Otherwise, what is the use of compassion? Okay, so the logic here is undeniable. There's a lot more of the others than there is of us. So they're significant. But also something we'd want to notice is that when we are caring about others, we're much greater. When we're caught up in our own objective, our own sort of pursuing our own personal happiness, we're a lot smaller. So the greatness of mind is really this condition of wishing others to be happy. And that's the foundation. That is what Gambopa he refers to as the supreme skillful means on the path. His Holiness the Dalai Lama refers to this as what the clever egotist would want to actually generate, because incidentally we are far less worried, we have far more confidence, we have far greater happiness when we have bodhicitta. But we should also extend this in the sense that it's not just that we're wishing all these other benevolent sentient beings, when we could become a bit abstract, but we actually wish all sentient beings, including, and that's where we should put our own bodhicitta to the test. Those that annoy us, those we might perceive as enemies. Now, when we in Buddhism say enemies, it sometimes sounds a little bit sort of dramatic. It really just means those that annoy us, those that bug us, you know. So if we can't do that, what's the point of compassion, you know? We'd be very sad if we had a great sage who was very benign and kind and compassionate, and then all of a sudden there was somebody that he or she like, I don't like those people. You know? We can clearly see that the very nature of bodhicitta is such that it's equally applies to all beings. So our intention. Now, when we talk about the actions that we commit, what really determines the value of an action is what's behind it, the intention behind it. So if we have bodhicitta, then we might just do a very small action. We would normally say just chanting a single mani or a single mantra. If we have this bodhicitta, then it has great value. If there's no bodhicitta, no matter how grand the action, you know, there we are making great donations to a great cause, and we're famous for doing so. And yet, if there's no real bodhicitta, yeah, it's ultimately, if there is bodhicitta, ultimately it will be pointless, futile. If there is this bodhicitta, we would say the effect never exhausts, just like if we put a drop of water in the ocean. Whereas if we do, however great an action, but there's no bodhicitta, it's a bit like just having a drop of water on our fingertip. It won't remain for very long. So there might be some little ephemeral benefit, but doesn't really ultimately do much. The 6 syllables of the mani is bodhicitta as a mantra. Reciting it perfects the 6 paramitas. Again, there's nothing that's not included in chanting the mani mantra. We should consider it as engaging and invoking, cultivating and perfecting the qualities of the Mahayana, including the 6 paramitas. Whoever cultivates bodhicitta, whoever does this, becomes a child, an heir to the Buddhas. So we're not just lost. We have a great heritage, which is innate to what we truly are, but which we very often overlook. And this is where then bringing this bodhicitta to the forefront enables us to become children of the Buddhas, meaning bodhisattvas. And then there's the absolute bodhicitta, which of course is what we engage with through the practice of meditation, through the practice of non-thought, through the practices such as shamatha and vipassana, or dzogchen and mahamudra, which is the natural condition of resting the mind free from any reference point. So this we can understand both from an intellectual, you could say ontological point of view, in terms of the nature of things as being free from anything that can be objectified, and also from the point of view of the experience, to simply rest the mind in not grasping. Rinpoche says absolute bodhicitta is the inseparability of voidness and uncontrived compassion. We would say it's naturally compassionate, this nature, because without any self, it naturally is. It engages without any barriers between self and other. And he goes on to say, it is the simplicity of the natural state, beyond all concepts and intellectual limitations, out of which spontaneous, objectless compassion arises, benefiting all sentient beings. And he also says, as you make progress in your practice, the two aspects of bodhicitta reinforce one another. To catch even a glimpse of the absolute nature of mind gives you the proper perspective to practice relative bodhicitta, and in turn, the practice of relative bodhicitta broadens your realization of absolute bodhicitta. So the two work seamlessly together. Also, basic to all the various paths is the practice of purification. This is something that's basic to not just the Mahayana, but also we have this in the all Buddhist traditions, purification. So, Palshamsha writes, wandering in samsara from beginningless time until now, whatever you've done was wrong and will lead to further wandering. From your heart, acknowledge all wrongdoing and downfalls, and, confessing them, with the 4 powers complete, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So, the thing is that as long as we're confused, then inevitably our actions still operate with this delusional premise of self and the object of self and other. So that everything we've done basically operates from that premise. So that's an important point then, and also of course this is what we were talking about earlier in terms of the shortcomings of samsara. But we want now presently to no longer operate within this confused patterning, and that's where we want to come clean. We might think, oh, I can't practice the path because of what happened in the past. And that's where we want to enable us to come clean altogether, and regardless of whatever negative actions we have engaged with in the past, and also due to our negative actions, sufferings we've gone through, we want to clear all this away. And so we want to recognize that in the past we have brought harm to others, and until we purify the negativity, this stays with us. As long as we've engaged in negative actions, we've also made others suffer, also others have made us suffer, and we have been stuck within this web. Accumulation of negativity, it obstructs our progress on the path. So as long as we have this, then we're very difficult to progress. So this is where we want to clean up what's happening, and we do so with the support of these 4 powers. So with the power of support, here, this is Chenrezig. We visualize Chenrezig as being present. So this is where we have someone there that is witness. There's someone there that embodies our the path and the qualities of the path and so forth. This is our teacher as inseparable from Chenrezig. And then with that, then we have what's called the power of regret, which is where we are aware of the ramifications of what we've done before, and we have regret. We don't see it as part of us, but we take it and we leave it aside. We don't need to drag it on. We say, I did this, it was neurotic, it was unproductive, I regret it. And that's the power of regret. Part of the antidote is then that we now then, instead of being caught up with these patterns, we engage all our actions with the Dharma. That's where we then practice as it's described here, and also in practices like Vajrasattva, where we then align that from now on we align our actions with the Dharma. And then we have the power of resolve. This is not just something that was randomly happening right now, sort of, we're on our Buddhist trip, and so for the time being we're doing this. No, it's something about really being determined to never again fall into these patterns of harmful actions. So in terms of this last power, Kinzo Rinpoche says, the fourth power also includes the resolution to be pure in your body, speech, and mind, like Chenrezig. As you recite the 6-syllable mantra, your negativity and obscurations will vanish, and all the qualities inherent in the enlightened state will begin to shine, like the sun emerging from behind the clouds. So this is then the practice of chanting Chenrezig as purification, or chanting the Mani mantra. To catch even a glimpse of the absolute nature of mind gives you the proper perspective to practice relative bodhicitta. How does this work? Well, this means that when we're beginning to discover this selfless condition, there's a sense, we say that particularly if we talk of this in terms of the path of seeing, when it's really seen what is the scope of the bodhisattva, the first level, then there's tremendous joy. There's this discovery of ease, carefreeness, that where there's no longer any sense that the others are impinging on me or the others threaten me, then naturally an unconditional caring and sympathy for others. So this is where the glimpse of the natural state of mind, the discovery of no self, that naturally enables us to care for others. We discover we have less and less worries about us in terms of being exploited by the others or the others being hard work. There's a sense of freedom that then gives us great joy in working with others. You know, there's I guess we could call it phenomenology around no self. And we sometimes think no self means that there's nothing, but that's not it. It actually, yes, with the freedom from reference points, freedom from this grasping, this dualism. Of course, there's still the perception of dualism, but there's a sense of ease around it. And that's where compassion becomes more and more easy in the sense of us and the others. Of course, ultimately, the Buddha doesn't have the notion of self and other. This is the falling away of duality altogether, but this is where compassion becomes even stronger in the sense that there's no limitations whatsoever. So we continually operate with, as what was seen before, this seamless, where absolute bodhicitta helps relative bodhicitta, and again, relative bodhicitta in loosening our self-grasping helps absolute bodhicitta. The mind holding on to an I clings to everything. This is the cause of samsara. So as offerings to the exalted in nirvana and charity to the lowly in samsara, give everything, body, possessions, and virtue, and dedicate the merit to all. Casting all attachments far away, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So we can understand where it is that samsara comes about. Basically, also like we were just discussing in terms of the bodhicitta and also in terms of purification, is this self. this clinging to self. And so what we're doing in the practice of the path is understanding where it is we've gone wrong, and then we understand we need to go somewhere. So we're becoming we have a clean slate that we're operating with, and then we need actually the provisions for the journey, which is then two accumulations, which we call the accumulation of wisdom and the accumulation of merit. So one is the wisdom is this intangible, basically absolute bodhicitta, the wisdom that we accumulate. Merit is the skillful means that integrates our relative condition and makes it work for us within the relative, where we need things, we need circumstances, we need a number of conditions. We need to have education, we need to have a healthy body, we need to meet the teachings, all of that. All of that comes about through merit, the good karma that connects us with the path to enlightenment. So we practice a lot of this letting go, and like Paltram is saying, there's the offering to the exalted in nirvana, and there's giving to the lowly in samsara. So that means we make offerings to the enlightened ones, we give generously to the unenlightened ones. So merit is relatively, then we would say merit is accomplished through giving. Wisdom is accomplished through realizing shunyata. And when we fixate on the I, we're sustaining this delusion. And we also then suffer as a consequence, the tightness of the ego, this impoverished condition. So for us to get free of our impoverishedness, the mentality, the construction of realms of poverty, then we practice giving. Khyentse Rinpoche says it's of crucial importance to understand that holding on to the idea of there being an I, a truly existing self, is the fundamental cause of our wandering in the three realms of existence. Once this mistaken belief in an ego has taken root, we start clinging to my body, my mind, my name, my possessions, my family, and so forth. It is these notions that then make us crave pleasure and abhor pain. The result is an unceasing succession of alternating attraction and repulsion, and from these underlying urges arise the conflicting emotions that disturb our mind without respite. So we want to make offerings. Now there's of course a lot of teachings in the Nundros in terms of how to make these offerings, but also we can just offer in general, however it might be. And just chanting the mantra here, we would say we are engaging in the practice of offering by means of simply letting go of our fixation. So we offer with the intention of bodhicitta, however we do it, free from expectations. So however we might make offerings to the shrine, making water offerings, if we're offering incense, if we're offering money to noble causes, if we're making money offering to the 3 jewels and so forth, whatever it might be. And we also, as we're chanting, we just consider that we are making offerings to all the Buddhas, we're making giving generously to all sentient beings, and we also offer our body. We can practice the practice of chit, simply that we're giving away our own body. We can also consider that we are doing all things, we're offering everything that's beautiful, like a beautiful landscape and so forth. So there's many ways, many instructions, of course, and in the text here there's some reference, but also in many other places we find instructions on how to offer. Again, there's 4 guests, and this is something that you have when you are practicing any kind of offering, really. We have it in the practice of the Ryu Sancho, we have it in the offering of the Kusula mandala, in the Longchen Yinting Mandro, and everywhere we could say when we practice this giving, there's 4 guests that we consider. The 3 jewels, the Konchugidren, there's protectors of the protectors of the Dharma, what we call Yöntengidren, the invitee. The first is Konchugidren, means the invitees of the 3 jewels. Then we have protectors of the Dharma, those are the invitees of quality. Then we have Jigdrugidren, the all sentient beings of the 6 realms. We're inviting them to come, and we're giving to them generously. And we have Lenchagidren, those to whom we have karmic debt. So these are the 4 guests that we invite when we are making offerings. Although, Rinpoche says, although it's true that your possessions are no more real than treasure found in a dream, or than a mirage city shimmering on the horizon, by offering them to Chenrezig and the 3 jewels, you will accumulate dreamlike merit, which will lead you to dreamlike happiness, long life and prosperity, and eventually to liberation. To accumulate true merit, make all your offerings and gifts with great devotion and without any pride whatsoever. So making this offering to what is in fact insubstantial has tremendous value. So recitation of the mantra, the Mani mantra, is also an offering, as it pleases the enlightened ones and it benefits other sentient beings. The Bodhisattva king, and we had this story about the Bodhisattva king, remember, where the dove comes in and followed by the hawk, and the king wants to offer his body. And so that kind of generosity then is what eventually leads to the achievement of enlightenment. This is from the Jataka tales. So this is one of the previous lives of the Buddha. Rinpoche says, through these practices, whose essence is generosity and concern for others, you can free yourself from the ego-centered grasping mind, the very basis of samsara. Making offerings and developing compassion for all sentient beings, you will eventually be able to give up any attachment to yourself whatsoever. This is the supreme offering, the true paramita of generosity, generosity gone beyond, for ordinary generosity has been. Sorry. Seems to me there's a word missing there. Has been okay. Has been sublimated into wisdom and compassion. Sorry, somehow I didn't get that. Yeah. So this is the supreme offering, the true paramita of generosity, generosity gone beyond. For ordinary generosity, has been sublimated into wisdom and compassion. Okay, so a few words missing there. So, okay. Now the last one, Guru Yoga. And here then we say, Khyentse Rinpoche says here, yes, this is an important point, sorry. We now come to the very quintessence of the path, and specifically then the Vajrayana path, the practice of Guru Yoga, through which wisdom will arise naturally and effortlessly in our being. So Paltra Rinpoche writes, the noble teacher has the nature of all Buddhas, and of all Buddhas it is he who is the kindest. Seeing the teacher as inseparable from Chenrezig, with fervent devotion, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So we always say that our teacher's qualities equals that of the Buddhas. We would say if the Buddha came here, he cannot save us. But what the Buddha can do is show us the path. And that is what the teacher also does. So we'd say our teacher's qualities equals the Buddha's. However, many enlightened ones have passed on, and it's our present teacher whose compassion touches us. We are greatly indebted to our teachers. So we say our teacher's kindness surpasses all the Buddhas. So we'd say the qualities are equal to the Buddhas, the kindness of the teacher is superior. We would also say that there's never been any awakened one who has not relied on a teacher. We can't learn enlightenment from books, information. It's about engaging and being sensitive to the qualities of that which lies beyond ordinary rational mind, ordinary limited mind. And so that's why we would say all the awakened ones have relied on a teacher. So these teachings that we're engaging in with, they are realized through devotion, through faith, through this greatness of mind that is free yet intuitive of what is genuine. And that kind of devotion is what really brings about realization rather than just the ordinary intellect. So with devotion, blessings, that which goes beyond the ordinary mind, that which introduces us to that which cannot be seized, that then enables this devotion. With that, then blessings and wisdom will flow into our being. So blessing is what enables us through our devotion to discover then wisdom. So this is what, through the devotion, then these qualities of blessing and devotion begins to permeate our being. Rinpoche says, with unwavering and single-minded devotion, see the teacher as the Buddha himself and everything he does as perfect. Then his blessings, the wisdom of all the Buddha's minds, will flow effortlessly into your being. Practice in accordance with his instructions, and as all the clouds of doubt and hesitation are cleared away, the sun of his compassion will shine through, warming you with happiness. Rinpoche says, to pray to the teacher as inseparable from Chenrezig is the very essence of Guru Yoga. The literal meaning of Guru Yoga is union with the teacher's nature. To blend your mind with the teacher's mind is the most profound of all practices and the shortest path to realization. It is the life force of the path and the one practice that includes all others. So when we practice this, and what is described then also here in the instruction is that we want to integrate the presence of the teacher at all times. We make prayers, we chant the Mani mantra as in Chenrezig, inseparable from the teacher. And we integrate this when we're sitting, visualizing the teacher, Chenrezig on the crown of our head. When we're moving around, the Chenrezig, the teacher on our right shoulder. When eating, we would consider that the essence of the goodness of what we're eating is offered to Chenrezig. When sleeping, we consider Chenrezig abiding within our heart. And basically, we would say whatever good that happens to us, we offer this, and we offer this up to our teacher, the Guru, Chenrezig. And regardless of whether we have good or bad circumstances, we see it as the blessing. Good circumstances, we could say, wonderful, there's something good happened, we can enjoy that. Negative circumstances, we can think that this enables us to purify negative karma, and we can welcome it. So this is very briefly then on Chenrezig and the practice of Guru Yoga. Khyentse Rinpoche says at the very conclusion here, he says, if you can see even a demon as Chenrezig, meaning that our dualistic concepts are falling away. He says, if you can see even a demon as Chenrezig, you're clinging to the reality of negative forces will dissolve. And such forces will no longer be able to create obstacles to your life or practice. When lightning strikes, rocks collapse, or wild beasts threaten, if your mind is filled with the thought of Chenrezig and you rely totally upon him, you will be completely free from fear. At the time of your death too, if you think only of Chenrezig, you will have nothing to fear from the terrifying apparitions of the bardo. But if you're overwhelmed by fear, hesitating between running away or hiding somewhere, you will be in constant anguish all your life, and at death you will be unable to overcome the delusory fears of the bardo. All the sublime practices of the sutras and tantras can be condensed into devotion to the teacher, and all of them are included in the practice of reciting the Mani mantra. Remembering that devotion to the teacher is the source of all realization, and that the essence of Guru Yoga, to merge your mind with Chenrezig's nature, is the most profound of all practices, recite the 6-syllable mantra. May I know which verse in chapter 1 inspired you the most, and which verses would you recommend us to keep in mind daily? Well, when we have these, we have, for example, verses like the 8 verses of mind training and so forth. We would never actually just focus on one, but we would say all of them have value. So let's say we have, I think, 82 or 88 verses in this. If we could just chant and think about one verse every day, and over the course of 3 months, then we would actually get through all the verses. If we could do that, that would be something which would be of tremendous value. So, and I haven't really approached this in terms of what do I like most, but more that more think of it in terms of every sloka has value. And so it's more about, as we read these, then think, what is it that the author is trying to say here? So it's a bit like if you have several children and they ask the parents, who do you love the most? The parents will, say, we love all of you equally. And I'm the same also. I would say all of these verses, they have equal value. So yes. All right. So for the next time, please read within this section, part 2, which is called the View, Meditation and Action of the Mahayana, Path of the Tantras. Read up to the section that's called up to the completion stage. So up to and including, no, not including, but just up to there, yeah. Okay. By this positive action, may all beings perfect the accumulation of merit and wisdom and attain the 2 supreme kayas, which arise from merit and wisdom. Thank you very much.